Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another Supatease video, and it's week number 2, and we're going to be doing another data analysis of all of these specializations and where have they landed, where is their momentum going, where is their trajectory going as far as viability for the season. I did want to make a Boomkin guide today, but the servers are down, so Boomkin guide is going to be postponed, but I don't want to waste the day now that we have more data gathered, and we've had a lot of excitement with the changes that have been implemented recently. I wanted to see how did the ladder respond to that, how did it react, and throw in some of my own opinions and experiences as well as observations from other pro level players and streamers of the like. So if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. But let's get started here. We've got the Drustvar website, which is a great website for tracking data and trends going on in the PvP scene. I think they're also adding Mythic Plus as well. I'll add a link to this website in the description down below. We're looking at the shuffle bracket here. Maybe if we got time, we'll look at Battleground Blitz as well. And the nice part about this website is we can look at all the different regions. So we can look at US, we can look at EU, we can fuse them all together. So I've got them all together right now. And if the website is going to be nice to me and load when we go between them, we'll be able to see like what are some differences as well between the regions. So one thing we're noticing with ranged DPS, which is going to be the first role that we're kind of zoning in on, is that Frost Mage is actually taking a significant lead when it comes to the solo shuffle bracket. And I think for one of these main reasons is that there are a lot of melee DPS that Frost Mage is really strong into, and Frost Mage is very durable in a volatile environment. It has more charges of barrier, which is just a massive absorption effect. It has great snare effects and has solid damage overall. So I think that in the shuffle bracket, this is why we see Frost Mage starting to dominate, whereas if we shift over to 3v3, pending that the website will bear with me here and actually load it or not, even in 3v3, Frost is actually still trending above everything, but Fire Mage is a lot closer. You can see that Fire Mage comes a lot closer to Frost. I can also see that maybe Frost Mage is this high up because I think in 3v3 it's even shifting to a very dense melee DPS meta. So overall, Frost Mage seems like a very safe pick right now, very strong, very competitive across multitudes of content. Really my only complaint with the website is the load times, but you can see Fire Mage and Shuffle falls off a bit from the high of Frost Mage, and I think that's just due to the durability. You're just tankier, so you can deal with volatile, uncoordinated situations a lot better than Fire Mage can. But it's not that Fire, like if we hosted a tournament, I think most of the mages would be Fire, but that then may be because it's Fire versus Frost. But Frost might be better than Fire into other matchups. So you do have some kind of cross viability between those two mage specializations. Marksmanship Hunter still holds strong at number 2. Obviously, we didn't see any real significant changes, a little bit of cleave damage reduction to it. It's just a very straightforward range DPS, very simple and easy to pick up, and just delivers you, very easy to understand results. And even with the pruning of its roots and its scatter shot, it's still holding really strong right now as a competitive specialization. Now the next spec here, Beastmastery Hunter, this guy is looking really good and nobody really talks about it. And it's really good that Blizzard, every time they're buffing Beastmastery for PvE, they've not been giving them those buffs in PvP, and this is probably why, because you can see it's just lurking under the surface. It's just waiting for the day that Marksmanship gets a tiny little tune down on its true shot or its volley window, and Beastmastery Hunter will likely jump up as well. So it's not as punchy, it's not as bursty as Marksmanship Hunter, but if you're getting attacked by Death Knights and melee DPS, the experience is a lot better. So it depends on your own personal preference. Do you want big burst damage with the trade-off of it's going to be annoying if DKs target you, versus you're not really annoyed if anybody targets you, but you don't really have that big punch to be able to KO a target, but you're still competitively viable. So depends on what you want. A little bit less frustration, or big burst damage with a bit more frustration. Demonology is starting to take over. I think the squishiness of Destruction Warlock, the melee DPS meta, Fistweaver Monks, probably all making it very challenging, whereas Demonology has like the durability, much like Frost, right? We're noticing this trend of durability amongst casters being a very valuable trait at the moment. And I think the crowd control is what gives it the edge. Just single-handedly can crowd control a healer with every diminishing return on a very low cooldown, which very few other ranged DPS are actually capable of doing it. And also has Mortal Strike, so it's going to have more synergies with other classes that don't have it. So it's got higher synergy potential, decent sustained damage overall, even despite the nerf that actually came into it, still holding in a great spot. But I do think that this Fistweaver melee cleave meta is going to make it increasingly more challenging for warlocks. Also, when we get to the Affliction Warlock, I think that's also something that's going to be contributing to Demonology potentially having a downfall. And then Fire Mage, which is probably the most highest rated specialization, at least amongst pro players, is because it just does remarkable damage and combustion, and it's decently durable into everything except hunters and then enhancement shamans. I've noticed that enhancement shamans can actually randomly be very challenging for it. So in solo shuffle, I'm seeing like a lot of Fire Mages get bullied around by these enhancement shamans, getting bullied by these marksmanship hunters. So if you are kind of new moderate level player fighting those classes, it will actually be very challenging in order to pull off victories. But if you're the best player in the game, you're going to feel like an absolute god on it, which is why I think we don't see it like trending all the way towards the top. I think the Frost Mage is a bit more durable. Marksman just delivers a bit ease of play relative to Fire. It's less twitchy, less spammy, but Fire is definitely still a really solid option if you want to invest into it as far as skill development. Destruction Warlock, still holding in a strong position. It's kind of been getting these nerfs towards its sustained damage patch after patch, and I think that it still has a chance. I think like Succubus can be a great option into the Paladins and Mistweavers that we're seeing a lot of, especially in solo shuffle situations. And Battlegrounds, it gives you a lot of burst damage as well. That can be really fun, but obviously getting trained down by Death Knights and the like, being stunned the whole game is going to be where your challenge comes into play, but it's still just a really good spec. It's still riding solid in the center. Boomkin starting to creep up a bit here from last week. Main issue I've seen from players as far as like the new to moderate level is survivability, and then that's why I was going to make the guide and review what I'm doing, what I'm thinking in order to position and stay alive basically in matches in order to actually get success with it. And the burst damage threshold isn't really that high. It's enough that it can win, but it's not like excessively high like we see from a lot of these other classes. So I think the survivability element towards newcomers, as well as the burst potential not being as high as some of the other ranged DPS, is why we're seeing it slightly lower than the rest. But its kit is still really good, and it's honestly really good into a lot of these melee DPS once you actually learn how to master it and you get it down pat. So I do think it's actually a decent pick, but maybe not like the absolute strongest like a lot of players are actually anticipating. Devastation Evoker is the most surprising on this graph, because especially when we're looking at shuffle, right? I was expecting Devastation to absolutely rampage everything in this bracket. It just does the most amount of damage of any class. It's very easy to play with the Disintegrate spam. You're immune to melee snares by just flying around with hover. I was really expecting it to be higher than this. So for me, I don't know if this is because Subtlety Rogue is so popular, or if it's because Evoker is just not a popular fantasy. I don't know. A lot of people really like Mage and Hunter. Mage, Hunter, and Warlock are kind of the staple like ranged fantasy roles that you expect, right? Boomkin's like this weird owl chicken with feathers, and the Evoker's the lanky lizard dragon. It's not like the fantasy isn't really maybe as raw, and I think that fantasy actually does draw down the popularity of the spec, even though it's actually so simple, straightforward, and effective. I think Devastation is just as effective and straightforward as Marksmanship Hunter is, and it would be really good into this Fistweaver meta with spam Sleepwalk and being able to kite them a lot. So I'm honestly surprised that Devastation Evoker is down here. I'm actually a bit curious to see in 3v3. It's even lower in 3v3. It actually falls below Shadow Priest in that regard. So Devastation is the most surprising when it comes to results here, but obviously popularity is not necessarily indicative of power, so take that into account. Just because it's down here does not mean that it's not viable. I think it's likely down here more so related to fantasy, although in 3v3 again, I think maybe the Subtlety Rogue factor does actually play a lot into its overall popularity, or the density of how many people are playing it. Shadow Priest, it's kind of having a slow ramp because right now it's very much so burst meta, and Shadow Priest doesn't really have a big burst window, but it is durable. It can survive a lot of these burst windows, unlike Affliction Warlock, to get into those later stages of the match where it can kind of sink its teeth in and get its damage out, which is why I think we still see it having at least some representation. A decent amount overall, but it's still decently challenging, even though they've done a great job of simplifying it. The new Tentacle Slam to get dots up without even having to cast is really effective, especially if you're a new player, in order to get damage out even while being trained by multiple melee DPS. But I think it's the Fistweaver, it's the spam Dispels from Paladin that are probably making this challenging for you. Like Fistweaver and Paladin melee wings, these are typically builds that counter dot classes, so I don't really the fact that Shadow is even holding this good means that it must have something going on for it, because I feel like dot classes should be absolutely in the dumpsters with how strong that healer representation is. Devourer Demon Hunter is slowly marching forward. Again, its burst damage very obvious once you learn how to play against it. I think it's probably going to perform better at lower ratings where people don't know how your class works, and you might be able to free cast and sneak out a star without anybody noticing. But as you get to higher ratings, the subtlety rogues will absolutely annihilate you. You're just as weak as your brother spec Havoc is in that type of matchup, and subtlety rogue is really popular. We'll see that when we get to the melee. So I think much like Dev Evoker, you're just getting countered by rogues. As you get higher and higher rated, your class gets a bit more predictable, and people start to understand it, and then it starts to fall off. But if you want kind of like this big cheesy big spirit bomb Kamehameha spec to play at like random BGs in a low level chaotic environment, Devourer is likely going to be really good in those environments. But outside of that, I think it can get a bit volatile and might get a bit annoying when people really expect your damage to be coming. Now, Ellie Shaman is creeping up. Now, we've only had one day, right? So when we look at this, I'm doing weekly updates of this. I kind of anticipate Ellie Shaman to rise a bit more with time, and even Affliction Warlock to rise a bit more with time. Ellie Shaman did receive significant buffs, but from what I've been hearing from people who play Ellie's, is maybe it's not that big of a deal. And again, similarly to Shadow Priest, it's like you're this AoE rot spec, and Fist Weaver, Holy Paladin, especially with Melee Wing Holy Paladin, those directly counter those specs and those builds, and they're so much stronger than every other healer that the representation is skewed, right? Like if it's a Resto Druid meta or Resto Shaman meta, these dot classes do a lot better in those situations, but those specs are riding low, and we'll see that when we get to the healers. So I think this is like a healer balance issue that's possibly skewing now Ellie and Affliction and Shadow, because their damage output is getting up there. I still think it will likely climb with time moving forward. I think that the buffs that they've been applying to it have been in the right direction. Got to be, maybe they need to be a bit careful about Ascendance and the cooldowns. Again, with a lot of these classes, like the cooldown damage is very high. I do think that their goal was to lower cooldown damage and bring damage up outside. So we'll have to see where they go with that. But I think Ellie could definitely start climbing, especially if there's any more changes that do come in. Affliction Warlock, a couple of players have been picking this up as it's coming through. I think its overall damage is getting a lot healthier. A lot of the Warlocks that came in my chat were saying that they're feeling like it's really good. I still think with Fistweaver and Paladin Melee Wings meta, especially now with Warrior, Arms Warrior was the most surprised one. To be fair, they came out literally one day before after I made my tier list and buffed them again. So I don't want to feel like I'm telling you guys the wrong information, but they threw in this last second buff on Monday, and it actually helped Warrior a lot. But those classes and comps have always been the hardest, so you're probably going to do better in like Battlegrounds and Solo Shuffle where people can't specialize those comps as opposed to 3v3. Where I think Affliction Warlock will probably be non-existent at the moment with how many Fistweaver melee cleaves there are, basically. Arcane Mage is creeping up a bit. Again, it's still just harder to pull off than Fire or Frost. It's still more complicated than those specs. The Missile buff was nice. Again, maybe we see this one start to creep up. It's kind of just a wild card. It's a little bit easier to deal with. It's also not as untouchable as it was previously for melee DPS, which is why it might have been doing a lot better if it was like designed like it was in the War Within, where you basically couldn't attack it if it was melee. It would be really good in those environments. I think you can still pull it off because it is a crowd control burst based ranged, which is good in the meta. It's just that Frost is tankier version of it and Fire is an easier to pull off version of it, which means you're just kind of the underdog version of it. You can do it, but it's a lot more effort for the result. Augmentation starting to rise up. Some people have been saying it's got this crazy one shot. I haven't seen it yet personally. Maybe it does have it. Again, there's like some tank specs also that have really crazy one shots that people haven't seen just yet. Entirely possible that something bugs along the way and breaks, and then suddenly something is one shotting. These are things to consider. But at the moment, I think it's ratting about where everybody kind of expected it to. It's just kind of just like really underdog. It's like the weird version of Devastation Evoker. It has unique things about it that can be cool, but for a lot of people, at least myself, I think it's just like a tank spec. You bring in healing and shields and absorbs, and you do lower damage than everybody. Like it's kind of just a pseudo tank spec. But the range DPS is moving in an interesting direction. When we look at the melee DPS balance, hopefully this is going to be able to load. I think what's interesting about the melee DPS balance is where Subtlety Rogue is landing, because Subtlety Rogue historically has been one of the most challenging specializations in the game to play, which it doesn't usually get this level of representation because it's usually only the pro players that can be able to pull it off. But they've simplified the spec a lot, and now a lot of players are able to actually pull it off, and you can see that on the chart. Like this is the highest I think Rogue has ever been, especially in Shuffle, of all time. But obviously Ret Paladin in the first spec in #1 position. Just really straightforward, big burst damage, lots of immunities, can club people, run around from range, very instant cast. I think it's in strong fantasy. It's just every single category is maxed out on it. I'd like it if they took some of the damage out of the Divine Hammer window. It seems like that's where a lot of the excessive burst damage is coming, and put that into the baseline spells. This is very similar to basically with all the specs that are in this type of position, to make the game less spiky. I think that'll be better for new players, and make the game better for everybody overall in terms of feel. Like, oh my god, I'm getting momentum, as opposed to, oh, my cooldown's gone, I'm useless now, right? But it's a very obvious reason why red is towards the top here. Also, Ret Paladin brings in great utility to get its Mistweaver out of crowd control with Sanctuary. So that's another thing you need to consider with melee DPS, is your ability to enable the Fistweavers that are basically in every game. Subtlety Rogue, remarkable position because of the 16-second DR change. So you can basically just stun a target, burst it down, switch, immediately stun another one, burst it down, switch, immediately stun it, and burst it down. You almost never run out. It's constant go. And because the rotation has been simplified, you don't need to put Rupture up on the target. There's less setup and investment. It's just way more straightforward. And then its damage is very high as well. I think it becomes much more obvious as to why it's so highly represented. Windwalker doing remarkably well right now. It just does extraordinary damage in its cooldown window. Pretty much the same thing with all these guys. They just overrun you in the cooldown window. Decently durable. Ride the Wind PvP talent definitely helps you out with a lot of the snares, and obviously they nerfed Concussive Shot. So some of the nerfs towards the snares are enabling you here as well. It's just a really good melee, and the combination of like these three together in melee cleaves is looking really good. And then you can kind of throw Enhancement Shaman in there as well, or Warrior even in there increasingly as well, with different combinations of melee, and that's like a great formula for a good comp. Unholy DK is still holding strong, which is surprising because Windwalker is doing so well. Warriors are getting better over time. I was expecting Unholy to kind of drop off after its 20% damage nerf, but it's still holding in a really good position. Just well-rounded. I think Chains of Ice is a big reason for that. Just kiting with Chains of Ice on these melee, keeping them snared is really good. But you can get rough lobbies, which kind of keep you contained. I think especially like Windwalker or Warrior-based lobbies can be very challenging, but it's still doing really well. Still a healthy position. Enhancement Shaman's doing great. Even after the nerfs that came in, still seeing it absolutely shredding people, and they were still playing Totemic. But you can also play Stormbringer if you want an easier version of it. So Enhance doing really good. Fury Warrior holding in a solid spot still as well, and I honestly think Arms is kind of catching up to it with the last second buffs that they came through, if you play Colossus Arms at least. But talking about Fury, it's just a lot of damage. But what's funny about this is that I think Fury's good into a lot of things that Arms isn't, like especially the casters, like the mages. But Arms is really strong into Fury directly. So if every warrior's Fury and you're the only Arms and you're queuing into them, you'll actually do pretty well. So I kind of think Warrior might be creeping up a bit here with the damage buffs. Like, its mobility and its defense is low, but the damage is starting to get to the point where you can't be ignored, even if you explode. Havoc, I'm surprised, is even having this much representation, because this Subtlety Rogue metric, Marksmanship Hunter metric that we saw should keep you down bad pretty hard. Like, those things directly counter you, just like we were talking about the things that counter the dot classes. Those things counter you with the way that their kit is built, and you're still honestly holding here, which is surprising. Now, at a tournament level of play, maybe they completely vamoose and they're gone. But as far as like a ladder play, you can make it work, but I think it will be a challenge depending on the matchups. Really depends on if they keep buffing Shadow and Affliction, because you counter those specs. So like, we got this food chain, right? This triangle of counterplay between the class design. So the classes that you kind of counter and like to queue into are lower represented. The classes that counter you are higher. So it's going to be more of a challenge. But I think it's just the lockdown and burst from Subtlety Rogue really that's kind of pinning you, and you don't really have a one shot. Whereas Arms Warrior, if with Colossus, has some pretty decent damage. Mortal Strike is starting to climb up there. Arms Warrior might see a swing. I queued into, I think it was Magnus last night. It seemed solid defensively even still. I was surprised actually. I think we played like a Fire Mage Boomkin into their Warrior Ret, and I was expecting there's no way Warrior Ret's going to beat a Fire Mage Boomkin. But they actually did. They were actually tanky. It was actually very challenging. I was very surprised at how tanky it was at that level of play. So I think Arms might actually start to climb up here as time moves on. Survival Hunter, you guys just keep catching nerfs. I don't really know why, and you guys just like, you guys are just not as spiky as Marksmanship Hunter, unfortunately. I think the sustain and the ease of play of Beast Mastery kind of outshines you, and you're just always in that position where you're like, well, BM's easier and Marksman has bigger bursts, so like, what's my identity? And really your only identity is Mending Bandage to remove bleeds, and Feral Druids and Assassination Rogues are not that popular. So the one thing that you've got as an identity is just not really able to be enabled, and the damage output seems a lot lower. Frost DK, a lot of people have been saying that they really like playing the Frost DK, but not indicative on the chart, at least in terms of popularity here, still riding towards the bottom. Maybe this again starts trending up a little bit with time. We have to let the days play through. We haven't seen all of the tuning adjustments coming in. I would have thought that Frosty K would be doing good in a meta where it's like melee cleaves and fist fevers, because usually Frosty K is the like anti-melee and it stacks them up and it punishes them with big cleave. But maybe the healing output from fist fever is just so high that it doesn't even matter that you have that type of cleave. But I was honestly expecting Frosty K to do a little bit better in the current meta. Maybe not as good as Unholy, but I guess we'll have to see. Time will tell with this one. Frosty K could be a good investment as far as rising over time. Feral Druid I think is getting a lot better, but it's still very challenging to play and to get effective damage out. I think the Tiger's Fury dot snap shot, well, that does give Feral great identity. It's harder to pull off than the bonky bonks of the Ret Paladins and the stun 2-button rotation of Sub Rogue, right? It's like a little bit harder. You got to be consciously thinking like, Tiger's Fury is coming up. Do I reset the bleeds now? Do I save the combo points? Do I need to go bear form? Should I clone? There's just a little bit more conscious thought. There's a little bit more action going on up here than on a lot of the other melee DPS. So I think that's why its representation will be lower over tall. I mean, we saw that with Subtlety Rogue, right? When it was considered harder to play in the past expansions, it was down here. Now that it's not, it's up here. So the complexity is a little bit lower. Also, it just doesn't have the same type of burst, and we are definitely in a burst meta. Assassination Rogue, you guys got nerfed the hardest on your burst. I don't even think you had the strongest burst. So someone watched like a peekaboo clip of him playing 1400 rating or something, and he's like smurfing, and then they're like, oh, we got to get rid of that because it's farming people at 1400, but he was just smurfing with it. So you guys got gutted out of the game almost immediately. You might have had a chance, and even then, I don't know, because your burst window was not as frequent as these classes for sure, and had more ramp. So I was a bit confused with that, but Assassination Rogue basically just got no hope of coming through after all that was done to it as a result. And with the minor buff, I don't see that really changing. It's just that you're limited on resources. You don't have as many vanishes. You don't have as much lockdown. The DR change actually hits you harder because you have silence and stun, and you don't have as many ways to reset it as Subtlety does. And then I think you're honestly a little bit squishier as well, but I think that's because Subtlety heals itself when it's in Vanish or heals itself when it's dancing, and you don't have Shadow Dance and you run out of Vanishes, so you eventually just stop healing at all. And then energy regen is kind of low. So there's some functionality issues with it, but then the one thing you had going for you, the burst damage of Kingsbane, just got ripped out before anything even happened. Meanwhile, these guys are like, ha ha ha, our burst damage didn't get ripped out, and they're just riding high while you guys are just struggling at the bottom. And then Outlaw Rogue, it's still very challenging to play. It's easier than it was, but it's still very challenging relative to the rest of them. This guy could just be lurking as soon as Subtlety Rogue gets nerfed, and maybe Outlaw Rogue just sweeps everything and it's sleeping under the tides here, right? Like if I was a pro player on an arena team and I had RMP as my comp, and I'd be feeling pretty happy because if Subtlety Rogue gets nerfed, I think Outlaw Rogue is just waiting. It's just waiting at a pro level, but at a beginner level, I think it's still a bit harder to pull off. Burst damage is just not really there, and it's still not 100. Like, it's just more stuff that you have to think about instead of just doing like the 2-button rotation, builder spender, and bonking people. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, which is one of the reasons it's lower represented. But obviously, it doesn't have the same type of lockdown that Subtlety Rogue has. I think specifically the talent on the Rogue tree, where when you vanish or you Shadow Dance, you reset a cheap shot charge, whereas Outlaw Rogue can run out of stuns, and Assassination Rogue can also run out of stuns. Subtlety doesn't have that. It's an infinite engine. So complexity as well as resource limitations are a reason for Outlaw Rogue's representation. Now healers in this meta, I don't think are going to come as too much of a surprise. I think we're still pretty top heavy. While they have been targeting the right healers and trying to bring them down, we're still very top heavy. But I think one of the reasons like Druid and Shaman are just towards the bottom end is that their cooldowns are not as strong, which is what I thought was the goal of the expansion, was like, we're going to lower the cooldowns, and we're going to buff sustain. So like these guys got their cooldowns pretty lowered. They're not as strong. But Mistweaver has Life Cocoon on seemingly no cooldown, and it feels like Ice Block, at least until you get to like 90% dampening. And then you have Way of the Crane, which is just an instant tops the whole team, which again, I thought we were trying to move away from the, you activate the cooldown, you go 100 to 0, or you activate a healing cooldown, you go from 0 to 100. I thought we were trying to like lower the volatility of the movement of the health bars to help out the beginning level players. But right now, Mistweaver is like the most egregious for being able to just like ping pong a health bar as much as possible. Whereas Shaman Druid, you ain't ping ponging nothing, bro. You were struggling through the mud, while these guys are just ping pong and health bars up really rapidly. So the nerfs are in the right direction, but I think it's going to require a lot more specific tailoring than just bringing 12% up or 12% down, like going into the cooldowns, going into the spells specifically. I think is the only way that we're going to see this change. But also it's going to be having to be done on the DPS as well, because even if we bring down Mistweaver cooldowns, well, then everybody's struggling through the mud to keep through the cooldown damage that all the DPS have. Holy Paladin's still just really strong, even with the mana change. It had infinite mana before, even despite the changes, but it's got really good cooldown management. It's just really strong into rogues, and Subtlety Rogue is really really well represented at the moment. It's also really strong into hunters, especially in shuffle areas. So you're still one of the best healers in that regard. Disc still does a lot of damage, but I do think it's starting to maybe lose its ground a tiny bit, but it's still just a really good healer overall with a lot of damage output. Holy Priest, really good. I recommend this for beginners because it's just the most straightforward, not a lot of keybinds. You just press direct healing and does direct healing, and there you go. And you don't have to juggle a lot because it doesn't have any buffs to really maintain, at least manually, anymore. So it's very automatic, very straightforward, but maybe not as effective as these guys. But these guys have a little bit more nuance as far as getting value out of their offense, then you really need to consider juggling as a Holy Priest. Preservation Evoker, you guys actually got clipped by the 5% healing nerf. I think that was probably targeted towards Battleground Blitz because you are probably the best healer there now with your flag carrying capabilities. Or at least more comparable, but it was a bit surprising to not see Disc or Mistweaver get more nerfs relative to what you ended up getting, which carried over from PvE. And then we talked about Shaman and Druid. Like your guys, to me, Shaman and Druid, they successfully achieved what they wanted. The cooldowns don't feel as strong. They don't yo-yo the health bars. And then that's where just, all of the healers should have landed. But if only 2 of them land there and 3 of them don't, then the 3 that don't are just going to outshine the ones that did. It's like you got to do it with all of them if you're going to do it. So I don't know where they're going to go from here. Like, are they just going to go, okay, well, we're just going to buff their cooldowns and we're just playing cooldown meta gameplay again, which we've played for a few expansions now? Or are they going to take the time and go into the classes that are cooldown heavy and bring them down to the same level as these guys as far as their, the healing outside of cooldowns relative to inside of cooldowns, and the damage inside and the damage outside? So it's a tough call as far as like development time, because you can make a fun game with it being the cooldown trading, but it's not what I thought that they were trying to achieve for the expansion. I thought they wanted an identifiable change of pace, less health bars going up and down rapidly, volatile play. I thought they wanted to achieve that. But to achieve that, they have to get it across all specs. And right now they've only got it across, a handful of them. And then the ones that aren't are kind of going off. And honestly, it's most of this is a result of the damage buffs they gave the healers at like the last second before going into the expansion, which I think was for PvE reasons. And they tried to counteract it over time, but that change alone is like one of the reasons here. But I think Life Cocoon's cooldown is honestly something maybe that they should look at as well. It just feels like you have it so much. But that's the breakdown right now of all the classes, all the specializations, my thoughts on where they're sitting, what's their trajectory, where they could go from here. So thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown, and I will see you guys in the next one.